A gas station sign on a quiet suburban road just flipped its numbers again, and the woman standing at pump number 4 stares at the screen in disbelief as the dollar amount races past $60 for a tank she used to fill for 38. This is not a glitch, and this is not some seasonal fluctuation that will quietly correct itself next month. What you are witnessing right now in March of 2026 is the opening chapter of what economists are already calling the third great oil shock in modern history. The first oil shock hit in 1973, when Arab nations slammed an embargo on the West, and gas lines stretched for miles around the bloc. The second struck in 1979 when the Iranian Revolution ripped global supply chains apart and sent oil prices up by 400%. And now the third one has arrived not as a slow creep, but as a violent detonation triggered by American and Israeli airstrikes on Iran that began on February 28, 2026. The Strait of Hormuz, which is the narrow strip of water connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean and carrying nearly 20% of the entire world, its daily oil supply is now effectively shut down. Iran, is supreme leader of oil, would pass through those waters, and for the first time in modern history, the most important energy choke point on Earth has gone dark. Brent crude oil has exploded above $100 per barrel, and some analysts at Mackenzie are warning it could reach $150 or even $200 if this standoff drags on. The national average price of gasoline in the United States has surged from roughly $2.92 per gallon to $3.60 in barely 2 weeks. That is a 60-cent jump and a 17% increase almost overnight. In Florida, gas prices are up 75 cents per gallon since the war began. But here is what most people are not grasping yet, because they are too focused on the number at the pump. Oil does not just power your car. Oil powers absolutely everything in the modern American economy. Every single item on the shelf at your grocery store arrived there on a truck that runs on diesel fuel. Every piece of fresh produce, every gallon of milk, every package of chicken was transported, refrigerated, and delivered using energy derived from petroleum. When oil prices spike by 40% in 2 weeks, those costs do not just evaporate into thin air. They get passed directly to you, the consumer, dollar by dollar, item by item, meal by meal. Fox Business reported this week that the Iran war is already threatening to hit Americans' grocery bills as transportation and refrigeration costs surge alongside crude prices. Economists warn that fresh foods, which must be transported quickly, will see price hikes faster than packaged goods, but that eventually everything on the shelf will cost more. Airline fares are climbing because jet fuel has skyrocketed. Shipping costs for online orders are increasing because the diesel that powers delivery trucks is more expensive by the day. And here is where the dominoes really start falling. The American economy was already wobbling before a single bomb dropped on Iran. The February jobs report came out on March 6th, and it was an absolute earthquake. The United States economy lost 92,000 jobs in a single month. Analysts had predicted a gain of roughly 55,000, and instead, the number came in negative by nearly double that forecast. The unemployment rate climbed to 4.4%, which is one of the highest readings since 2021. Healthcare jobs, which had been propping up the labor market for months, suddenly collapsed, driven partly by a massive strike in California, but also by deeper structural weakness underneath. Federal government employment continued to shrink as budget cuts rippled through agency after agency. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics revised its historical data to reveal that average monthly job creation in 2025 was a pathetic 15,000 positions per month. For a country with 170 million workers, that is essentially standing still. So picture this for a moment. You have an economy that is already bleeding jobs, and now you are dumping $100 oil on top of it, like gasoline on a fire. This is the textbook definition of stagflation. Prices going up while the economy slows down at the same time. It is the one scenario that the Federal Reserve has absolutely no clean answer for. The Fed is currently holding interest rates frozen at 3.5 to 3.75%, and at their March 18 meeting, which is just 4 days from now, they are virtually certain to hold. Again, the Consumer Price Index came in at 2.4% in January, which sounds decent until you look at core personal consumption expenditures, which ticked up to 3% and is expected to rise even further when the next reading drops. That means the underlying inflation engine was already running hot before oil added jet fuel to it. Goldman Sachs has already pushed back its forecast for the next rate cut from June to September. Traders in the futures market are even more pessimistic. They now see only one tiny quarter point cut in all of 2026, and it is not expected until December. After that, the market sees no additional relief until well into 2027 or even early 2028. Think about what that means for a real American family right now. If you have a variable rate mortgage, you were counting on rates dropping this year, and that relief is not coming for potentially 18 months. If you are a small business owner carrying debt at current interest rates, the refinancing window you desperately needed has been slammed shut and bolted. If you have credit card balances, the average credit card interest rate is going to stay punishingly high because the Fed cannot cut rates when inflation is surging. You are being squeezed from both sides simultaneously. Prices climbing higher while your income stagnates and your cost of borrowing refuses to come down. That is the death spiral, and it is not a theoretical concept anymore. It is happening in real time across kitchen tables all over America. Now the world is governments know this is a crisis. 32 member nations of the International Energy Agency unanimously agreed to release 400 million barrels of oil from their strategic reserves. The United States alone is contributing 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Japan has pledged 80 million barrels for rapid release. South Korea has imposed fuel price caps for the first time in 30 years. It is an unprecedented coordinated global response to an unprecedented disruption. But here's the problem. Those 400 million barrels only cover about 20 to 26 days of the supply that normally flows through the Strait of Hormuz. It is a one-shot tactic, and if this crisis lasts longer than a month, which it very likely will, those reserves dry up, and we are right back to square one, with no backstop. The markets know this. That is why even after the biggest coordinated oil release in human history, crude prices barely budged. The strategic reserve is a bandage on a wound that requires surgery. Meanwhile, the geopolitical situation is getting worse, not better. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has declared the Strait of Hormuz completely closed to commercial traffic. The United States Navy has admitted it is facing challenges securing safe passage through those waters. President Trump told reporters the war could be over soon, but then the very next day, Iran escalated by threatening to target any vessel attempting to transit the strait. Prices are swinging wildly. Oil dropped 10% in a single session when Trump made his comments, then surged right back above $100 when reality reasserted itself. This kind of violent volatility is itself destructive because businesses cannot plan, investments cannot be calculated, and consumers cannot budget when the price of the most fundamental input in the economy changes by 10% every 48 hours. Let me bring this back to something concrete and personal because I know the numbers can get overwhelming. If gasoline hits $5 per gallon, and there is currently a 36% probability of that happening by the end of this month, according to market analysts, the average American family will be paying roughly $160 more per month just to fuel their vehicles. That does not include the higher grocery bills, the higher electricity costs, the higher costs for every single good and service that depends on transportation. Layer on the fact that wages are not rising fast enough to keep pace, and you have a classic affordability crisis that punishes working families the hardest. The wealthy can absorb a 20% increase in gas prices without changing their behavior. The family living paycheck to paycheck cannot. And right now, roughly 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, according to recent surveys. The historical parallels are sobering. The 1973 oil shock pushed the United States into a deep recession that lasted years and triggered inflation that took a decade to fully tame. The 1979 shock contributed to the brutal stagflation of the early 1980s, when unemployment hit 10% and mortgage rates soared above 18%. We are not there yet, but the trajectory we are on is pointed in exactly that direction. The question is no longer whether this oil shock will hurt. It is how badly and for how long. So what should you actually do right now as a real person navigating this storm? First, do not panic, but do not pretend this is not happening either. The worst financial decisions are made either in blind fear or in willful denial. Second, understand that cash has enormous value in a volatile environment. If you have been sitting on savings, wondering whether to invest right now, consider that waiting for clarity is not cowardice, it is strategy. Third, look at your monthly budget with brutal honesty. Identify every single discretionary expense and ask yourself whether you can absorb a 20 to 30% increase in your essential costs, because that increase is likely coming in the next 60 to 90 days. Fourth, do not take on new debt right now, especially variable rate debt, because rates are not coming down anytime soon and the cost of borrowing is going to remain punishing. Fifth, pay attention to the March 18th Federal Reserve meeting. Watch the statement. Watch the dot plot projections. Any hint that the Fed sees inflation accelerating further is a signal to tighten your financial defenses even more. We are living through a moment that future economics textbooks will dedicate entire chapters to. A war in the Middle East. The most important shipping lane on Earth, locked down. Oil above $100. 92,000 jobs lost in a single month. The Federal Reserve, paralyzed. Strategic reserves being drained at an unprecedented rate. And somewhere in a quiet suburb, a woman at pump number 4 is staring at a screen that now reads $73, and she is wondering how she is going to make it to the end of the month. This is the third oil shock, and it is just getting started.